the Central Housing and Planning Authority. And in the coming days, you'll have representatives from the Guyana Revenue Authority. We'll have representatives from the Guyana Office for Investment. We'll have representatives from the banking community. We'll have representatives from the various other organizations, both state and non-state actors, who are part and parcel of this whole process of ensuring that Guyanese who are not living there, they also have the opportunity, a window as to what is taking place, and to be part of this, as I keep describing it, as an exciting journey of transformation. So again, I want to thank you for participating. I want you to make full use of tonight's interaction, and certainly for you to also to spread the word around that this is continuing for the entire week, and it's part of our whole thrust in terms of ensuring that we have sustained and a dynamic interaction with members of our global Guyanese diaspora. So let's have a productive evening in this regard, and make full use of the technical officers from the two agencies tonight, as well as join us the others, that because these webinars go until Friday. And so I want to encourage you to make full and maximum use of this opportunity. Once again, I'm quite sure that we will continue this type of interaction, but it is a clear reflection and demonstration of our commitment to engage the diaspora. Good evening, everyone, and let's have a productive session.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. At this time, I'd like to open the floor to our representatives from the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission. Tonight, we have with us Mr. Michael Hudson. He's the Deputy Commissioner of the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission. He is a land surveyor by profession. He has over 20 years of practice in the field of surveying and land administration. He holds a diploma in land surveying from the Government Technical Institute, a diploma in forestry, and a degree in law from the University of Guyana. He also has a postgraduate diploma in land management from the University of the West Indies, among other specialized certificate courses at various academic institutions in the fields of land management and land administration. With him, we also have Ms. Joel Chung. She is the manager of the land administration at GLSC. She's been in the position since January 2020, and she has been with the Commission for an excess of 20 years. She's also a sworn land surveyor and has worked in all of the technical divisions of the Commission since she was first employed in 1995. She also holds a degree in public management and a Commonwealth Master's in public administration from the University of Guyana, and is a registered mediator with the course of Guyana with advanced training in mediation. I'd like to open up the floor now to Guyana Lands and Surveys. Please remember that we will take all of the questions in our moderated question and answer segment. So first we'll have Guyana Lands and Surveys, and after that we'll have Central Housing and Planning.
Thank you, Madam Jones. Let me take this opportunity to thank the Diaspora unit for organizing this presentation. It's always good to have an opportunity to explain the procedure and the systems at Lands and Surveys. We don't always get this opportunity to have such a wide audience. Mr. Robert Sad, Madam Roswell, head of the Diaspora unit. Me and my colleague, Madam Chung, will give us short presentation. I hope we have permission to share our screen, that we prepared a short presentation just to introduce Lands and Surveys and to give a concise overview of our operations and how you can access lands in Guyana. Do I have permission to share the screen?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So this brief presentation will give an overview of the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission, the aim of the commission, definition of key term that we will emphasize, benefits of investing in public lands, the natural regions of Guyana, the application requirements, very importantly, the application processing time. So we know this is an issue of interest to most persons who will wish to invest. The ease of doing business, time of processing application is always important. And some of the issues in relation to GLSC and investors. Now, the commission was formed on the 1st of June 2001 through the Guyana Lands Surveys Commission Act number 15 of 1999, and it replaced the former Lands and Surveys Department within the Ministry of Agriculture, which actually had a very long history starting in 1893 with the first Lands Department ordinance. At that time, we were basically in charge of forestry, lands, and mines. A lot of the older folks will relate to the Lands and Mines Department. Now, we are a semi-autonomous agency working towards achieving self-sufficiency, but land is so pivotal to development and the social issues that attains land that we continue to support national development. So one of our major aims is to
Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt, Joseph Pro-Chair. I'm not seeing the presentation that's supposed to be shared.
Same here. I'm not seeing it either.
You see it now?
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Right. So the commission is the custodian of all public lands. This includes government lands as well as state lands. They both were basically organized by the 1903 Act, the Lands Department Act, and the 1903 State Lands Act. We do not have jurisdiction over quasi-government lands. That is lands held by GLSC or Lynn Mine, which is administered by NISL, or other lands held by other semi-autonomous agencies such as CH&PA, which will be a part of this presentation later. It is also important to note that indigenous title lands, although they are state lands, they are not under the jurisdiction of Lands and Surveys, and we'll touch on some issues in relation to investment in those lands in the segment with GLSC and you. So 23% of Guyana is actually indigenous lands, 23% uncounted. The Commission's jurisdiction is also circumscribed by the Mining Act and the regulations made on the Mining Act, as well as the Forestry Act and the regulations made under the Forestry Act. In those two areas, parts of Guyana are declared mining district and forestry district. And in order for us to entertain applications for those areas, we will have to consult with the Geology Mines Commission and the Forestry Commission. So the overall aim of the Commission is to contribute towards poverty reduction. Most of the questions that you'll find in the application form in the proposal will hinge around how will you help to reduce poverty. And our overarching aim is to develop land, but through sustainable macro management. So Lands and Surveys also has a planning department, land use planning department that looks at macro planning for land and not prescriptive planning like our sister agency, the Central Housing and Planning Authority. Now, the only key term that is relevant to this presentation today is the definition of land, which is described in the State Lands Act at Section 2 as land covered by water, as well as the seabed and the outward limits of the territorial seas of Guyana. Now, as important to note for investors who wish to invest in public lands is that it's not all punitive. I tell people that the only difference between a lease and a transport is beneficial occupation and the rent. So you have all of the rights. You have permission to mortgage, permission to transfer by sale. So if you invest in the land and you no longer want to proceed with the project or you have any difficulties, you have that right once you're in compliance to request a transfer of the land by sale. So your investment is basically secured. You have the permission to sublet. You have the permission to divest the land to your heirs. And at the end of the term, at the end of the term of the lease, once you request a renewal, the lease gives you that right for renewal of the lease for no less than the term of years initially issued. Now, most people will be familiar that, well, Guyanese will be familiar that Guyana has 4 natural regions: the low coastal plain, hilly sand and clay region, the highland region, and the intermediate savannas. But for this presentation, it makes logical sense to divide Guyana into these 4 regions that we've highlighted: the low coastal plain, the hilly sand and clay region, and the intermediate savannas just behind the low coastal plain, the interior rainforests and savannas, the north and south Rupinouille savannas, and the exclusive economic zone. So on the low coastal plain, where most of the population resides, that accounts for about 10% of the landmass of Guyana, and it's protected by natural or man-made sea defenses to prevent inundation from the sea, as well as irrigation dam to prevent inundation from heavy rainfall in the hinterland and the highlands. It comprises of Class 1 agriculture soil. Most of it was formerly humanized and developed by the sugar estates. And the state lands in this region, most are held by GLSC. And we referred earlier that GLSC is a semi-autonomous government agency, and we don't have jurisdiction over those lands, save and except the lands held through leases from the Lands and Surveys Commission. We still have some amount of available land in the low coastal plain area, but it is mostly swampy and it is a little bit more difficult to develop. And immediately behind that region, the low coastal plain, is the hilly sand and clay region and the intermediate savanna. Now that area is Class 3 and 4 agricultural soil, not as fertile as the low coastal plain, but that is the area that we have much available lands. And one of the drawbacks for that area is the lack of adequate infrastructure, access and roads, electricity, mainly roads and electricity. The other region is the interior rainforests and savannas, which actually has Class 1 and 2 agricultural soil, but it is encumbered by the mining and the forestry districts. Most of the mining and forestry districts falls on this belt. So applications in that area mostly will have to get the no objection from the Commissioner of GGMC or the Commissioner of Forestry. Most of the arable lands in that area as well is owned, well, it's owned by the indigenous groups, and access is sort of by the low carbon development strategy, which basically restricts the amount of land that you're allowed to clear fell in any particular area. And the newest area that attracts a lot of attention these days is the exclusive economic zone, 200 nautical miles from the foreshore seawards. Now, the application requirement is pretty simple. Anyone can apply in Guyana. Under the Aliens Act, there's no restriction on foreigners owning land in Guyana. You must be over 18 years. But as a matter of policy and a matter of basically complying with the conditions under which leases are granted, the 2 conditions, beneficial occupation and rent, it is advisable that foreigners incorporate a company so that you'll have perpetuity in ownership and so on. How to apply? Well, under Section 2 of the regulations, it's very simple. The name and address of the intended beneficiary, the purpose to which the land will be put to use, the amount of land required for the project, and a description of the location and the region of interest. For complex investment, you will be required to submit a developmental proposal which will be probably vetted by GoInvest and other agencies based on the nature of development that you propose. Now, the steps and timelines. After you send in your expression of interest to lease lands, it will take a minimum of 2 weeks for the commission to acknowledge your interest and to respond to you. That response will ask you to attend an interview and to identify the land, and staff will work with you to identify a suitable portion of land for your project. After that, you need to execute an inspection of the land. There's a fee attached to the inspection, basically acreage fee if it's a small tract of land, or if it's a more extensive tract of land, it will be based on an estimate prepared, which just offset the cost to take you to the location and to bring you back safely. The next step is filing of the application. So once the client visits the land, is satisfied with the location, satisfied with the soil type and other things, they're asked to come back and file a formal application. After that application is filed, then we start processing the application. So time begins to run after that formal application is filed with lands and surveys. It will be filed at the regional office, and regional processing will take a minimum of 1 month because the application has to go to the regional council, the RDC, for them to be aware that the project is the proposed project, and to give any comments that they wish to send to lands and surveys. Head office and processing will take a maximum of 2 weeks for straightforward applications. And then we move towards the approval process. After the application is approved, you have to execute a cadastral survey to demarcate the boundary and to prepare a plan showing the situation of the land. Based on that plan, the lease will be prepared. And then the final step is lease issuance. So for standard applications, we are looking at a maximum of 90 days processing from the time that the formal application is submitted. But for more complex application, where we have to get GoInvest, Central Housing and Planning, or EPA, Ministry of Tourism, that will take a little longer than 90 days. Now, some of the issues that we wish to highlight at this point, with respect to folks in the diaspora and large projects in Guyana, is that outside of Gaisuco, most of the lands in that second zone that I referred to earlier, the hilly sand and clay region and the highland regions and so on, are actually held by persons, well, Guyanese residing overseas. And one of the issues that we've realized is that a lot of the land is non-beneficially occupied, and the rental is nominal, so to speak. So payment of rent is not an issue really, because state lands are basically granted to encourage beneficial occupation. So the rent is not very high, not set very high, so it's easy to pay. But then we find that the projects, the proposed projects, is not always complied with by the lessee. Some projects will require vetting by GoInvest. They may require investment agreements with the Ministry of Agriculture. If it has a tourism aspect, we will consult with tourism. If it's a large project with environmental issues or potential environmental issues, we will need some time to consult with EPA as well. And basically, that's our presentation in summary. Yes, thanks a lot, Madam Jones. Over to you.
Thank you. All right. I know you guys might have some questions, but we'll just hold on to those questions a bit longer and we'll move over to Ms. Chong.
Okay, so Mr. Hudson did the presentation on behalf of Lands and Surveys, so I'm not going to add to that. I'm going to support him in the question and answer segment.
All right, thank you for that. So we'll now move on to Central Housing and Planning. There's a huge team there waiting to, I guess, address all of the concerns and answer all of the questions. So we'll let them get through their presentation and then we'll get to the questions. So if they're ready, I'd like to invite Central Housing and Planning to join and make the presentation.
All right. Thank you and good evening. Can you just indicate if you're hearing me?
We're hearing you.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. With all protocols already established, I would say good evening to you all. The Central Housing Plan Authority is pleased to be a part of this webinar on investing in Guyana, what you need to know. I am Fayola Zor. I'm the Senior Development Planner at the Central Housing Plan Authority, and I am joined in this webinar by our Chief Executive Officer, Mrs. Sherwin Greaves, the Chief Development Planner, Ms. Jeremy Stewart, and the Director of Operations, Mrs. Denise King Tudor. And they will assist in answering any questions you may have after this presentation. So this presentation is prepared to guide you on starting investment in Guyana as it relates to planning permission and all the necessary requirements. If I can start to share my screen. Great. All right, so you may be aware that the Central Housing Plan Authority operates as a regulator under the Town and Country Planning Act and as a developer under the Housing Act. So this presentation will highlight both functions this evening. Under the Town and Country Planning Act, the Central Housing and Plan Authority is empowered to plan, monitor, and regulate land use activities in all areas in Guyana. Under this act, it is the duty of the authority to control development and to engage in planning activities to ensure that all development is carried out in an orderly and progressive manner. Therefore, all development to be undertaken must be granted planning permission by the central authority. Key to this permission is collaboration and consultation, and we'll go into that a little bit later. Now, what is planning permission? Planning permission is a formal authorization issued by the central authority which allows development at a particular site. And planning permission is actually attached to the land and can be implemented by anyone, not necessarily the person who has applied for the permission in the first instance. Now, how does the system work? Under the Town and Country Planning Act, it states that all applications for development must be submitted to the local authority, and then it will be forwarded to the central authority. So all of your applications will be submitted to an NDC, a town council, or if the area is not covered by an NDC, the Regional Democratic Council. That application is submitted and it's inspected by the public health inspectors and building works inspectors, and they will assess your application looking at health requirements and building regulations. These are then sent to the central committee's central committee, and they would now send the application to the Central Housing and Plan Authority. Once that application is received at the central authority, the developer will be acknowledged, so you know that your application is now at the authority. We will now process your application, and this processing of the application actually entails site visits, collaboration with other agencies, and research depending on if the complexity of the application. So once that application is processed, it is then recommended to the CH&PA board for decision. It must be noted that the CH&PA board is a statutory body that is required to make decisions on all land use in Guyana. Once the board makes the decision, that information is then returned to the local authority, whether the application is permitted, whether it is prohibited, or even if it is deferred, that information is communicated. Now, the local authority will now, using that information that is submitted in terms of planning permission, will now issue the building permission. And it must be reiterated that the local authority can only issue building permission. So the local authority cannot tell you at any stage in this process to commence any construction work without the permission of the central authority. The applicant will now update their application with the necessary permissions from central housing, and they can now proceed to start their work. Now, the CH&PA, in processing your application, must collaborate with other agencies. Why? Because all of the knowledge does not reside within the CH&PA, and other agencies, because of their issue-specific legislation, they have their requirements as well. So applications are sent to other agencies for their consideration before the application can be decided by the CH&PA. Some of those agencies include, and it's not limited to the slide that is being shown here, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Fire Service, Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission, the Civil Aviation Authority, National Trust, Sea Defense Board. The nature of the application will entail the agency that we will collaborate with. It must be stated also that collaboration may include public consultation with residents, depending on the type of development. Now, as mentioned before, all applications must be submitted to the local authority. So what is the actual role of the authority? They must refer all the applications that are submitted to the central authority, whether they have recommendations or they don't have any recommendations, whether they may approve of an application or they may disapprove of an application. All applications must be referred to the central authority. The local authority is also responsible for issuing the building permit after planning permission, not before. And the local authority will assist in monitoring and enforcement because they are the agency rather, that would have those inspectors monitor as persons built to ensure that they're building in compliance with all health and safety regulations. So, when should you apply for planning permission? If you have a proposal for housing, commercial, industrial development, whether you want to subdivide a portion of land, whether it's a public building or an institutional development such as schools, health centers, whether it's recreational, parks, cemeteries, public open spaces, whether it's for engineering services such as water, electricity, sewerage, and even waste disposal. All applications for development must be granted planning permission before they can proceed. So planning permission is needed whenever the original use of the land or the premise is being changed and for the erection modification of any building. So as stated, the Central Housing and Plan Authority Board as a statutory body may decide on all applications. And they would say whether the application is refused, granted with conditions or without any conditions. And some of those conditions are actually recommendations coming from other agencies that we collaborate with in the planning process. The decision of the board is fixed and subject to review only through an appeal. And an appeal can only come before us if the circumstances has changed or there is something that we would have omitted in the processing of your application. Planning permission may also be rescinded if the development is violating conditions of approval or documentation is proven after the decision is made that it is false, incorrect or misleading. So what are the types of applications? We have the outline planning application, we have full application for planning permission, and we have the application for land subdivision. I will now go through each one and its requirements. Outline planning permission application. Now this application basically tells, this application tells the developer if the site is suitable for the development, what it is you're proposing to do. And this application is actually something that we are looking to really promote as an application that safeguards your investment. Now, before you start to do anything, you want to buy the land, you want to start building all of these things. You must be clear on whether the site can be used for the activity. The outline planning permission application tells you this. So what is it you need to submit? First of all, this application is submitted directly to the CH&PA. It does not have to go through the local authority. You will need to submit a letter of intent, and this is addressed to the Secretary of the Board, a detailed project proposal that outlines what it is you want to do. And we have another slide that gives you some more information in terms of the details of the project proposal. Importantly, you need to submit a location plan showing the site and its environs. We want to ensure that we're clear on where the site is located, what is happening around, and the access, how do we get there? We want to see all of these things on your site location plan. Document of ownership or intent to lease or purchase. At this stage, this is not a requirement that the person, the developer, owns the land, but you must show that there's an intent to purchase it or to lease it, or if you're the owner, that will work as well. You will also have to pay a processing fee, which is quite minimal. As stated, all the applications are submitted to CH&PA for outline planning permission. Now, once you would have gone through the outline planning permission, and it is found that the site is suitable for the development that you want to do, you will now go through the full planning permission. And that application is submitted to the local authority. The requirements are on the screen: 3 copies of the building plan that must show the site layout, the floor plans and elevations, the copy of the survey plan of the lot, document of ownership. At this stage, you would have proceeded to acquire the lot if you're not already an owner, the processing fee, proof of identity of applicant, and copy of the TIN certificate are some requirements at this stage for full planning permission. As stated, the application at this stage must be submitted to the local authority. We will not be able to accept an application for full planning permission at the central authority. Another application is the land subdivision application. Now, this application is actually submitted to the Central Board of Health, and it is forwarded to the central authority for decision. Now, if you're submitting an application for land subdivision, it comes in 2 parts. You can have lots, number of lots under 10, numbering 10, and you can have over 10. So if it's under 10 lots that somebody's subdividing, maybe you have a plot of land and you want to subdivide into 2 or 3 parcels, it must receive planning permission as it is development. And so a cover letter describing full subdivision and requesting planning permission must be submitted. Copy of the current title, the ownership, and copies of the cadastral plan along with processing fees. Now, if the subdivision of the land is more than 10 lots, you would have to submit a planning scheme and a design layout, which really tells us how this land will be used, what are the features within the scheme, if it's residential, commercial, reserve spaces, community facilities, the roads. You must show us that. And this particular application would require environmental authorization from the EPA. Stated, this application is submitted to the Central Board of Health, and it is then sent to Central Housing and Planning Authority. So, after you would have submitted your applications, we would have inspected, we would have process your application, you've collaborated with the agencies and so on, what happens after? So for outline planning permission, those decisions are returned directly to the applicants because they will submit the applications here. Full planning permission applications are returned to the local authority because they will have to now issue the building permits. With applications for land subdivisions are returned to the Central Board of Health. So in addition to those types of applications, we do consider major developments. And these major developments, of course, will have some additional requirements for processing. So this is actually now divided into different categories. We have housing, commercial, and industrial. Now, in terms of housing development, as we just spoke about land subdivision, these are proposals that would entail over 10 lots that you're subdividing. So we mentioned the planning scheme that will include drainage, water supply, the land use zones, things like that. We must see in your proposal. Importantly, we must see how will this scheme be managed, because this will now be a privately held scheme, privately developed scheme. So we need to know how this scheme will be managed as part of your proposal. Of course, the requirements are still the same in terms of your proof of ownership, the authorization from the EP, and your planning and design layout. Once this is approved, it will now be sent to the Central Board of Health because it is part of the land subdivision process. Commercial development. If you would like to submit to the Central Authority for commercial development, you must have a project proposal that entails what it is you want to do on the site, parking, loading, how solid waste disposal, but you must indicate to us the site layout concept. How will this site be used for what it is you want to do? If there are any phases to your development, you can also outline it at this stage. Commercial development as well is also authorized by the EPA, and as such, environmental authorization should be sought as well. For industrial development, of course, another project proposal has to be prepared, and it must entail details in relation to what it is you're manufacturing, raw materials, how it will be stored, disposal of waste, description of the processes on site, means of transporting the materials to and from the site. Importantly, again, is the site layout concept, what it is you want to do on site and how it would be laid out. What must be noted here is that persons must be aware of all the requirements that is needed for their process, their business, so that you can adequately request the amount of land needed to, to have efficient movement and safe movement of and operations of your business. Of course, environmental authorization from the EPA is also required. So, what are some of the challenges with applications? In order for us to make a decision on your application, the documentation submitted must be sufficient so that we are able to make a decision. Some of the things that would help us with that decision is your submission of your building plans. And sometimes it is noted that the drawings that are submitted are of poor quality. We're unable to really discern what exactly persons are doing on the site, and there's sometimes not enough details listed on the plan submitted to help us to make a decision. Another challenge would be persons commencing development before approval is given. And sometimes when you do that, you may be violating regulations, not only from the Central Authority, but other agencies that have a part to play in the planning permission process. As well, sometimes some of the project proposals that are submitted do not have enough details to assist us to really make a decision in granting any such decisions on a type of development that someone is submitting. So continuing with challenges in the planning permission system. As mentioned before, I think a slide was shared before about the different agencies that are involved in the planning permission process. And each agency would now have its own requirements, its own legislations. And as such, it makes it sometimes a bit difficult in terms of delays in approval of permits and licenses. And what is the impact of all of that? In that sometimes your decision is delayed. Persons cannot commence their businesses in a timely manner, and we continue to be ranked poorly in the ease of doing business index when compared to our counterparts in the Caribbean and Latin America. So how do we improve this? We have currently in a consultancy process to look at a single window solution. This single window solution, with the end of it being an electronic permitting system. Well, what are some of the things that we have to do before we get to that stage? We have to re-engineer the processes. We have lots of agencies having different mandates that are involved in the planning process. And they themselves, we need to map it out. We need to ensure that we're not repeating processes over and over. We're not asking for documents that are not necessary and things like that. So we're really trying to streamline the process by re-engineering the process, mapping out all of those agencies and what are their requirements to ensure that once this single window solution is up and running, that we have a seamless transition in the application process. Another requirement of the single window solution is the legislation. Every agency has its own legislation, has its own rules, has its own process, and as such, some of them can be conflicting and leading to delays. And so we may need to do some review of the legislation while we re-engineer the process. At the end of the day, we're looking at having an electronic permitting system so that when the application is submitted, it goes to the other agencies, the central authority, and so we start the process. We're hoping to cut down time. We're hoping to touch all of the agencies so that they can have their input so that when someone receives planning permission, it would have reached all of the agencies at one time. Now, that was CH&PA as the regulator under the Town Country Planning Act. The CH&PA under the Housing Act empowers us to plan and develop land for housing and related purposes. I think most persons are familiar with this, this part of the function of the Central Housing Plan Authority. Under this act, it is the duty of the authority to develop settlements, catering for various land uses, community facilities, community and social facilities. Therefore, the CH&PA can construct houses and allocate land for various land uses, such as housing, commercial, industrial. So this is now where we're looking at developers who are now looking to develop a housing scheme, develop industrial areas or commercial areas, large scale or huge commercial enterprises. So applications for housing development. What it is you need to submit to the Central Authority. You must submit a proposal, and this proposal will have, it's not limited to the things that are listed here, but these are some of the basic requirements that are needed. You must have a statement of interest, and that's addressed to our CEO. You must indicate your financing option, whether it's your sole financer, whether it's a hybrid, whether you're looking for a government partnership, what is the financing option. Of course, the regular things such as your business registration and corporation documents must be submitted. We also ask the authorization to seek reference from bankers. We need to do our due diligence to ensure that we represent persons. Statement of any litigation within the last 5 years. We must be aware of what it is company has been involved in. And of course, with any such large-scale development, we're looking to see how our citizens can be employed. So we want to focus on employment generation. We want to know projects of similar nature, what have you been involved with, because if you're dealing with housing, we would like to have, to engage with persons who have done housing construction before. List of necessary equipment and personnel to, execute the job, statement of method, work program to execute the project. And all of these would be examined by our director of projects, who I think is in this meeting this evening. Evidence of financial capacity. As we mentioned, you must have that financing option for you financing this project. The investment and development cost, what would be the total cost of this project, and of course, the duration of the project. So that is for housing development. So persons who may want to partner with us in the housing trend. Applications to land for business purposes. These are persons, when we looked at the previous applications, those were more small scale development. Now we're talking about larger plots of land within commercial areas or industrial areas. And these applications are requested, the request is actually sent to the CEO, and you're requesting land for business purposes. And of course, it must have a business proposal with a site concept, your business registration, national ID and TIN certificate. Those are necessary requirements. And the business proposal now, very detailed at this stage, must include a couple of things, and I want to pay attention to the location of the land and the amount of land needed. At this stage, it is required for the developer to really understand the necessary processes that may be involved in whatever commercial or industrial development they want to do, so that they can ensure that the appropriate amount of land is being requested for the particular development. Of course, we also look at employment generation, so how much persons can be employed within the development, whether it's a startup or as we continue the implementation phase of your development. What are the products and services? What really will you be supplying to the market? Marketing plan, your investment, the cost for your investment, financing, those things as well. And of course, if any environmental implications may be resulting from your project. As stated before, the site layout concept is crucial in your submission, whether it's land subdivision, whether it's for any type of non-residential use, commercial, industrial. So the site layout concept basically tells us how the site will be utilized for whatever it is you want to do. So of course, you must have some amount of detail in terms of the dimension, how big it is, how big is the plot, what it is you want to do. We must have an idea of the building footprints, how many buildings will be on site, internal circulation, where will be your waste disposal, any other amenities that may be on site. And of course, we must include on-site parking, green areas, how you access the plot. And of course, when we're talking about this 65% building coverage, we're speaking about the plots must have their necessary building requirements, which is your setback distances, to ensure that for the safe operation of your business in terms of fire and other safety requirements that are in place. So, process of allocating land for business purposes. We would have mentioned it before, but this is just in a simple flow chart where the developer submits that application to the CH&PA. Of course, the applicant is acknowledged by way of letter, and the application and documents are listed and sent for approval. Once approved, an application offer letter is sent to the developer. The developer makes an initial payment, and thereafter, the agreement to sale is finalized and issued to the developer. The developer submits a building plan by the local authority. We would have mentioned that entire process at the beginning, and the report is submitted For approval by the CH&PA board, we would have discussed this before. And the developer, once you have that approval from the CH&PA and of course the local authority, because you will now receive your building permission, the developer will now request to process certificate of title, they make a final payment, and then you can receive your certificate of title. Now, you must complete all of these processes before you can now submit your plans to the local authority, because one of the documents that you may need at this stage would be your documents of ownership. So this would now be your certificate of title. So that is the process to be followed for allocated land or business purposes. Thank you for your attention. And I hope this presentation was clear in terms of the processes that, and the requirements for planning permission from the Central Housing and Planning Authority. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fayola Azor. Ms. Fayola Azor is the Senior Development Planner within the Planning and Settlement Development Department of CH&PA. That was a very comprehensive presentation, and I'm sure that you all have questions for her at this time. We'll open the questions. I noted that we already have one question for Mr. Hudson regarding whether foreign entities are eligible to apply for land. So if you're still on, Mr. Hudson, would like for you to answer that one, and then we'll move on from there. So please make use of the raise hand feature and we'll address you. I apologize now if I mispronounce anyone's name.
Good afternoon again. Foreign entities could apply for land. There's no restriction on foreign entities, aliens, non-nationals applying for land under the Aliens Act of Guyana. But because of the conditions of a state land lease, which requires beneficial occupation, it requires a presence in the country for maybe over half of the year so that you can comply with those conditions. It is advisable that the foreign entity register a subsidiary under the Companies Act of Guyana and apply under that entity or under that company to hold lease land in Guyana. So there's no restriction, but as a matter of policy, it's better to incorporate the company in Guyana and apply for the state land under that company name.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. I think another question is coming from Ms. Minnie Captain. Ms. Minnie Captain, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time. Thank you to Rosalinda. I just came back from Guyana yesterday. I'm a little bit confused, but I am hoping that Mr. Michael would be able to give me a start. My family had a land that they paid lease for. I'm not sure if this is a government thing or it's a village thing. And this is up in Unity Village, Mahaika. I leave Guyana 40 years ago and my family paid the lease for that land. And I came back, like I went back now to see if I could get the land or we could have a transport on that land. We developed the land for the past 70 years. We paid the lease, but I believe the village office was burnt and there is no records to prove that. And right now I'm confused. I don't know where to start. So Mr. Michael, since you are a land surveyor and I heard your presentation, I think you would be the most appropriate person to give me some advice, if you don't mind.
Not at all. I'm happy to do so. So Unity Mahaika is private lands. So I rather suspect that The lease held by your relative is a private lease out of a transport, right? It may have been administered by either a private individual or the village council. So if you're unable to find any record in the village council as to ownership, once you've been in sole and undisturbed possession of the portion of land, you are eligible to apply under the Title to Land Prescription and Limitation Act for a transport for the portion of land, right? So all you need to do is to execute a cadastral survey, explain to the surveyor that you had a lease for the land. You'll have to show him the location. He will do a cadastral plan, and he will put in the memorandum that you claim to have been in sole and undisturbed control and possession of this portion of land under a lease, which you have no record for, and you wish to make an application to the court for prescriptive rights to the land. And that should solve your issue.
Thank you very much. So I start with a land surveyor. Is that what you are asking me, or you are saying for me to do?
Yeah, because your title to the land seems to be defective because there's no record of it, right? You can't find the lease. There's no record of the lease in the records at the council. But
Okay.
once you've been exercising sole and undisturbed control and possession of that portion of land, and you can prove that to the satisfaction of the court, well, then you have a right to approach the court for title to the land. So just contact a surveyor
Okay.
and give him the details and ask him to execute the survey on your behalf.
So any land surveyor I can contact doesn't have to be within the government.
No, any land surveyor. So you can check
Okay.
the Lands and Surveyors website and you'll find a list of registered sworn land surveyors in Guyana, and you can choose anyone.
Thank you very much for your time, sir.
You're welcome, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. There's one more question in the chat, and then we'll move on to Ms. Rupchan Williams. Someone is asking, what is the minimum and maximum land area that can be applied for? And how do they find out what lands are available?
So the standard state land lease is for 10 acres of land for agriculture purposes. But there's no minimum, there's no maximum that you're allowed to apply for. You're allowed to apply for as much as you need to execute your project with proper justification. But under the State Lands Act, standard grant is 10 acres of land for agriculture purposes. That is for a small holding, right? For residential purposes, through Lands and Surveys, it's just about half acre because we treat it as a homestead rather than strictly residential, because we deal more primarily with rural and suburban lands for residential homestead purposes. So the short answer to the question is there's no minimum or maximum, but the standard grant is 10 acres, but you can apply for as much as you need to sufficiently execute your project.
Thank you for that. Ms. Rupchan Williams, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Good evening. First, let me say thank you for having this forum. It's very, very beneficial for me because I've been in a void for so long of getting information and this kind of knowledge. It's really helpful. So thank you for hosting the webinar series. Mr. Hudson, I wanted to ask you, how long are the leases for, the duration? So is there an expiration on homestead versus agricultural versus commercial, et cetera?
So the president is authorized under the State Lands Act to issue a grant of state land under lease for a maximum of 99 years. But the standard lease that we issue is a 50-year lease as a matter of policy. But at the president's privilege, he can issue a lease under the State Lands Act for as much as 99 years, sorry.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just piggyback in there, and did you have any idea of what are the fees? I know you said they're nominal, so What are we talking for 99 years? Ballpark? For 50 years.
Okay, so for residential purposes, the lease to lands and surveys is $3,600 Guyana dollars per annum. For coastal irrigated lands is $1,000 per acre per annum. For lands along the river, it's $200 per acre per annum. And for lands in that hilly sand and clay region that I referred to in my presentation, it's 100 Guyana dollars per acre per annum. So it's very nominal.
So the fee to take us to see the land and serve it, that's where you get us? That's just asking.
No. The fees to take you to do the site visit is just enough to offset the expense for the officers and transportation and so on. So that's why I said in the presentation, if it's a large amount of land, we do it by estimate. For example, if it's go out into Aichuni, we will calculate how much it will take us to go there safely and to come back, and for the officers to give you a good tour of the area, and that will be the estimate. So, but for standard applications, we'll start off at 20,000 Guyana dollars, right, for the site visit, for up to 20 acres. And then $400 for each additional acre, just to make things simple and quick. All right, so for standard small applications, there's $20,000 for up to 20 acres and $400 for each additional acre in excess of 20 acres. So we calculate it like that. But then when it goes up to like 100 acres, 500 acres, 1,000 acres, we do an estimate. So you pay the realistic cost of getting us out there, getting us to the location with you, and to bring us back safely.
Thank you.
I see Mr. Charles Segrim has raised his hand. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Mr. Hudson. You mentioned 10-acre plot as the norm for small projects. I was thinking of for maybe which area on the coastal side, whether it's in Barbies, Demerara, equivalent, up in the highway, or so on, are these lots available? These 10-acre blocks that you can do maybe small farming, whether it's in livestock farming or anything of that sort. Can you identify some areas that might be available for those things? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. So I referred in the presentation that we have lots of land available in the hilly sand and clay region, like along the highways, like along the second depths, on the Neiman Sand in Essequibo, Cookwood Savannah in Barbies, and so on. Right, those areas are available. 10 acres is the standard grant, and the only issue that we have, as I mentioned before, is the issue of infrastructure. All right, the roads are not what we'd like them to be at present, but there are reserves that is set aside for the development of roads. So what we advise clients who wish to develop those lands now is that they will have to bear the cost of putting in the infrastructure to get to where the parcel land is. Most people obviously need access to water. And what I explain to people very often is that access to water will require you to build more roads, because most of the existing roads will be on the watershed. And to get down to where the creeks are and so, you will have to put in some amount of infrastructure to get down to it. So it's not that the lands are not available, but the infrastructure is not what we would like it to be at present.
Just to follow up, Mr. Hudson, if you don't mind. So the cost that you have to incur to develop those infrastructure, whether it's access road and so on, is how do you recover that cost? The government give you tax credit? I mean, is it some credit later on down the road? Because there are costs that I presume other persons will also use eventually. So how do you recover those costs? Thanks.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert on how you recover costs through your tax returns, but I may presume that there is some possibility where you can put it as part of your investment outlay and in some way recover it in the future. But to answer your question more frontally and directly, the investor has to execute, have to foot that cost to put in the infrastructure. But there must be a way that, I mean, when the persons from Ministry of Finance and the expert in that area comes on, there must be a way that after you outlay that money in a developmental project, you are able to recoup it through tax, the tax system. But this is a question that you will have to pose to the financial experts.
Thanks again, Mr. Hudson. We have a question here from Mr. Eden Gadraj.
Yes, hi. You may have had this in your presentation before, but I just joined. My question is, do you have a land use plan as to what's commercial, what's agricultural, and what's commercial? So that if someone wants to acquire some land, you know what's available where.
Thank you for that question, yeah, Mr. Grajaj. So we do have land use plans for Region 6, Region 10, Region 9, I think for Region 2 as well, right? But our planning, as I mentioned in the presentation, is not prescriptive planning, so to speak. It's macro planning to show exactly what exists at the moment, right? And the potential use for those hubs, the best use scenarios. When it comes down to exactly what you want to do on a particular space, then we will refer your application to the Central Housing and Planning Authority, and they will do the prescriptive planning and zoning. And my colleague in her presentation did allude to the fact that outline plan information is the ideal process by which you will know exactly what project could be executed in what location, right? In addition to that, there are other already pre-planned areas in the country which have cadastral plans already approved by housing, showing residential layouts, commercial layouts, industrial layouts, and so on, right? But between those gaps, between those existing hubs and gaps, if you want to execute a project, we will refer your application to the Central Housing and Planning Authority, and they will do the outline plan submission and direct you as to whether or not your project could be executed in that specific location.
So then you'll be approved for zoning.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Perhaps we can ask Mrs. Zor, is there a method for interested persons to see the zoning throughout Georgetown and I guess throughout Guyana? Is there a map? How do people access that information?
All right. Yes. Chairman. Okay. Well, for the entire Guyana is not zoned. According to the Tonga Country Planning Act, they have areas that are under planning control. So for some of those areas, we have zoning plans. For those that we do not have, that's where the outline planning permission process is required, because once that submission is made, then we have to assess that application, and that's why it is important we ask for that site location plan in relation to what is around the environs, because then we would have to conduct a site investigation, assessing, see what type of land use is surrounding that development, and based on what you have submitted in terms of your site location plan and your detailed project proposal, then we're going to know the compatibility of what you are proposing in relation to that site, in relation to its environs, not only in terms of land use compatibility, but the intensity of that use. And if it will be allowed, what sort of site development standards will be required. in terms of your setbacks, in terms of your on-site parking, your green spaces, and some of those, as I know to as the site development standards. And that's as part of the, what you call the outline planning commission, where we determine that, yes, if this project is suitable, and if it can be allowed, maybe we'll ask if you can scale it down a bit, or consider how it can fit in that environment, because we go in and change that use in terms of how it fit within that specific.
So in other words, you have to submit a draft plan for approval.
Yes, and not a full, not details where architectural drawings, all we ask for the project proposal and a site location plan with the surrounding development.
Understood.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
We have some follow-up questions in the chat. Someone is asking, Ms. Shanta Prasad, would someone be able to access the long-term area planning and make a determination how favorable or unfavorable to your own plan for the property?
Okay. We have started because we know that the importance, or we have put that on the front burner in terms of forward planning. And we have start with some key areas. Well, not for the entire country, because I think it's lands and surveys. They look at the overall national land use plan. But the Central Housing and Plan Authority, we focus on the local area or the urban plans. So we have some areas we have started looking at is the Wales planning area. That's where the gas to shore project going to be. There's a lot of land there. We're looking at that's a long-term plan. The new town along the Linden Susite area. We heard a lot of it in the press mentioned by His Excellency, the Silica City project. That's another area that we are working on. And because of the oil and gas, there is so much demand for land along the waterfront. And that's another plan that we going to look at, is the Georgetown waterfront development plan. So those are some of the priority areas we're going to look at in terms of long-term planning.
Thank you. Ms. Lorene Damla, sorry.
Thank you. Beautiful webinar. It opened up my brains and my eyes. I just have a question. I submitted it on the chat. Can I lease some private land to someone else?
Yes, Madam Dharamlal, you can lease private lands to a third party. There's no restriction on leasing lands in Guyana. So if you own lands under the deed registry, land registry, or even through lands and surveys, you have that right to excise a portion of that land and to lease it to a third party under separate deed.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Nathan Peters. If he's not available, here's another question from the chat. Ms. Ruchan Williams is asking about digging wells on your farm or homestead.
So you can execute a well on your farmlands, but you will need permission from the Guyana Water Authority, the GWA, Guyana Water Inc., to execute a well on your leasehold property.
Okay. Another question from Taf Gafour. Are there plans to have residential lots along the new highway from Herstel into Parika?
Where?
Where? Sorry, can you just clarify where from Herstel into Parika?
Herstel into Parika. I'm not sure if they mean the new highway that's meant to connect to Ogle. But I guess we can address the issue of residential lots coming up along the newer highways. We'll leave it at that.
Well,
Might not be along there.
not be along there
Vicinity.
in the vicinity. But first, if we're talking about the new highway that's from Ogle, and from Ogle proposing to link to the Timeri area where the first phase will be, I think, up to Pace Bush as a first phase. For that new highway, well, it's not residential lots per se, because along that new highway, you would look to the kind of business or the kind of facilities to support because of the linkages. So along there, you have the Ogle airport. So within the vicinity of the Ogle, you might look at the more hotels and those sort of things, that sort of land use, and maybe going within the vicinity, not along that. Then you would plan where you have the various other various land uses, where is the residential and the other neighborhood centers and stuff. But along that new highway, you would have one day kind of development in support of what is happening there. Because I think the Ogle airport has been upgraded to a regional airport, so there's need for that sort of facilities.
Tafka 4 again is asking between the new bridge to Parika.
New bridge to Parika. Oh, that's on the west coast. I think there is a proposal from Schoonard, a new route from Schoonard to Parika. A new highway is proposed there. And all of that is taken into account with the long-term plan that is going to be crafted for that Wales planning area. All that is taken into account, the new highway.
Yes, there will be some.
There would be residential, industrial, all the mixed use, all the kind of development to support a sustainable urban settlement.
Thank you. There's another question here about the ability to mortgage lease land. Can someone subleasing these lands be able to mortgage their sublease as well?
Yeah, so you have 5 rights in the lease, and the permission to mortgage is one of those rights granted under the standard state land leases. So you can mortgage.
Okay, another question from the chat. Are there any restrictions to building container homes or tiny homes?
Well, once it complies with our building regulation in terms of the size of a bedroom. I think the size of a bedroom, our current regulation is 100 square feet. In terms of the accesses, right? Once it comply with our local public health and building regulations, well, sure.
Okay. We'll take a question from Mr. Wayne Ford.
Hi, good evening. I would like to ask a question that is related to the broader diaspora issue. I think Rosalinda might be in a better position to answer that. So investors are interested in the expected rate of return on investment. More importantly, investors are concerned and stakeholders are also in the area of trusting the information that the government shares with them, especially when there is no diaspora investment policy in any area and no diaspora engagement strategy published for the diaspora. So I've got a couple of questions. So here's the first question. On September 9th, the Caribbean News Global reported that Foreign Minister Robert Prasad told the Diaspora at the September 8th webinar that there's a comprehensive work plan that was developed to govern diaspora strategy. Can you tell us where we can find that comprehensive work plan that governs diaspora strategy? Second, during the same webinar, in response to a question, Mr. Robert Prasad stated that the diaspora document or the diaspora strategy was at the cabinet level for approval. However, in a report that was submitted called the Post-Diaspora Conference Report Update, it was indicated, and I quote, that much of what is contained in the strategy document is being implemented. It also stated that the diaspora unit will post a strategy paper to allow feedback and questions. So in summary, what one would conclude from that is that there has been you've implemented a strategy from a document that is being reviewed by the cabinet that will then be shared with us in the diaspora for suggestions and feedback after it is implemented. Please reconcile these conflicting statements. Thank you.
All right, let me just straight out jump to this one here, Mr. Ford, because I think we can very well address this in a separate thing or in a different way or different forum, because what we've done here, really, you're talking about diaspora strategy, whereas we're focusing, first of all, right now on some things that we needed to get out to the diaspora, which has to do with the agencies involved here and the direct questions and issues relating to those agencies, not diaspora strategy at this point in ever investment. So I really would have preferred if certain questions were being asked, in accordance to the theme that's being focused here, so we don't get our stuff in mixed up. But let me just go ahead quickly for the sake of your purpose. There is no confusion in anything that's been said there. When we said that the diaspora strategy is before cabinet, that is correct. And so government has to agree on the overarching objectives of what they want, all right? And so it's there for them to say, yes, there are about 10 or 12 broad areas, which the strategy include, the strategy paper include, and we agree with that. That does not mean that we can't accept anything or any suggestion from any diaspora group or anybody any member of the diaspora under that strategy. So when we indicated that we're going to put it out there, it's not to say that we're going to it's a cart before the horse kind of thing, basically. But if government identifies 10 or 12 areas that it wants to focus on, and under that strategy that's developed by the IOM, then that's good. And then we can say to the diaspora, we have sports, we have philanthropy, we've got remigration, we've got investment, and therefore, how do you foresee this relationship now going out there? Coming out to investment, for example, the diaspora can say, well, we have no communication with agencies relative to investment, and we would like to see and talk more about concessions going on here, and those are things that supplements what the broader objective of the government. So there isn't anything in terms of where it's at with cabinet, and two, us putting out there for that kind of feedback, basically. And there's a reason why we wanted that feedback there. We wanted to make sure that as many people as possible have a say in it, because when I checked the document itself, and this was a recommendation that I made, is that I wasn't sure how many organizations or how many persons from the diaspora actually contributed to it. So it would be good. I mean, there's nothing wrong in putting it out there so that we can get more feedback, again, to support the broader objectives. You talk about the comprehensive work plan. I would have wanted the FS to comment on it, but I can tell you what we understand with the comprehensive work plan, apart from the strategy, is that the diaspora unit usually, or we are responsible for using the strategy as set out or agreed upon by government, and we develop it. So again, let's use investment as an example, and we have the broad areas of what we're looking at. Then we can identify what are the specific strategy or what are specific actions that we want to undertake under that particular category. So when I mentioned, and it was I who mentioned at the webinar on the 8th of September, that we are actually implementing or we're in fulfilling it. It's not to say that we took that document and we're like, oh, let's implement 1, 2, 3, 4 without it going through the necessary channels. So far, what we have been doing at the unit in terms of our crafting of our work plan, when we compare it with what's in the strategy, amazingly, it is identical. So whatever government's position, we are actually implementing initiatives and objectives, and it's actually like in sync of it, basically, with what the strategy has. So it's not like we looked at the strategy to say, you know what, the strategy talked about 10 different things that needs to be implemented, but you know what, cabinet haven't said anything about it, and the diaspora unit, no. When we looked at it, we're like, hey, look at this. It's actually in keeping with what the strategy talks about. Now, why am I saying all of that? Diaspora engagement is not anything that's secretive. It is not anything that is, let's say precise science. There are so many strategies that can be used, so many actions that can be taken, basically to engage our diaspora. And it's a living, continuous engagement. So that's where we are right now on the matter there. So when cabinet finally says, this is what we agree to, then that would be the final say in the broader objectives, and we will continue to develop it. We'll continue to implement it, and we'll continue to engage the diaspora again for ideas and initiatives when it comes to how do we implement the broader picture, basically.
Thanks, Rosalinda. Wonderful. But the first question still remains unanswered. The foreign minister referred to a comprehensive work plan. Are they two different things you're working from? But the question is, where can we find a comprehensive work plan that he referred to that is being used right now?
Okay, so when we speak of work plans, this is like what we would have devised to guide us for the year. Now, take, for example, we've already developed let's say plans for 2022. And again, when I say develop, don't take that as a final thing. These are just some ideas that we've already put forward to some of the ministries for collaboration for the year 2022. So once we get approval for that and it's sync with what the government wants under the broader picture, and of course, we discuss it with diaspora groups, and this is what we would like to do, or this is where we like collaboration, then we will begin to implement it. Now, every agency has to be guided by that work plan for budgetary purposes. And if we want budget, so we must at least come up with a plan to get that budget for the year 2022, which is what we have been working with for at least the past few months, past few weeks for the Ministry of Finance. So that will guide us for next year. So when we talk about comprehensive work plan, that is exactly what we mean. Again, it ties in with the budgetary requirements for every unit or every ministry to list so that we can have our funding for the next year. And it caters for all the different thematic areas, whether it is sports, culture, promotion, in the arts, philanthropy, remigration, it caters for all of that. But like I said, we'd be more than happy to engage the other party, but we really want to get more people involved in the agencies and the challenges they've had or any clarity that they need from those agencies.
Thank you, Ms. Rasool. We'll move on to two more questions from the chat, and then I see we have another hand raised. Richard Singh is asking if he wants to invest by doing a preliminary exploration in Guyana. Is there a website that he can visit before he submits his application to find out where lands are available in Guyana? For example, if he wants to invest in an industrial development, can he see a map that will show him where these industrial development lands would be, that he's saying that would save him time before visiting Guyana?
All right, so let me go first. From land surveys end, we are not at that stage yet, where we can give you a map showing all of the areas that is available. right? We are not quite at that stage as yet. So for now, he will have to visit us or have a representative visit us and to sit with us and to look at some of the paper maps and digital maps that we have before this.
I think from the central authority, that option is the same as well. Although we are digitizing a lot of our areas, they are not available online. So for the areas, but we have persons can, well, since it's overseas, they can have somebody come in and discuss with us. Even if we're always open to virtual meetings as well, where we can have that type of discussion, where we can share at that stage some of the areas that may be available from the Central Housing and Plan Authority side.
Thank you. Tav Gafoor asked a question, but because I know that this question comes up quite often, I'll ask it in a different way. Are real estates or other individuals, other than the person in the diaspora, allowed to represent someone living in the diaspora when they're looking to acquire private land for residential use and for if they're looking to invest in lands from, let's say, lands and surveys?
So because of the nature of the title that we issue, your personal representative will have to approach us with a power of attorney. So we advise people in the diaspora to execute a power of attorney, giving the individual limited authority to engage lands and surveys, to pay fees, to sign on behalf, and so on. So real estates wouldn't be legally allowed to execute a contract on behalf of an individual. So they will need a power of attorney to substitute them at lands and surveys.
Can I ask a follow-up question really quick to Mr. Hudson about that? Mr. Hudson, can we utilize the consulates wherever we're located to facilitate some of this? Because they're like not just anybody, they're very important people, right? So can we?
Yeah, definitely. So the ambassadors in our consulates across the country are legally authorized to execute power of attorney documents once the two parties are present with them. So you can go to the consulate and our ambassadors could draft that document and endorse it. And the person could come to Guyana with that document, register it at the deeds registry, and act on your behalf in Guyana to execute the lease.
Thank you. Mr. Bernard Rowland, are you on?
Yeah, he's there. Is he hearing?
In the meantime, we'll move on to Mr. Andy Moonsamy. Mr. Rollins, when you get a chance, you can either put your question in the chat or just let us know when you're ready.
Thank you, Keisha, and good evening, everyone. First and foremost, kudos to CH&PA and Mr. Hudson on a very informative session. My question is in relation to the time frame on an earlier response for those commercial and other mixed use from Ogle towards Timeri. I'm just wondering about a time frame for that. I also have a comment. And I guess kudos as well. I traveled to Guyana about 5 weeks ago, specifically to investigate land use and availability, and visited CH&PA to inquire about commercial land. And it was my understanding that Region 4 was full to capacity, or there weren't any available spaces. So I'm curious about the time frame for that. That's my question. In terms of my comments, I also wanted to extend kudos to CH&PA for the event that occurred during my visit at the Arthur Chung Conference Center for the Le Reconnaissance land distribution for various income levels. The event was extremely well organized. I had called the ministry and was informed, making initial contact, and was informed the event was happening, and it was well organized in that it was everything that was needed, including vendors and businesses that support the entire process, from mortgages to financing and all those elements. They were present, and I was guided in a very professional and informative way. So kudos on that. The other piece, though, kind of related to diaspora investment and success in doing business in Guyana, there were, on visiting CH&PA, there are processes in place where, as a result of COVID-19, service hours are being reduced. There are queue systems which are highly inefficient, where residents of Guyana, and in my case, potential investors, are having to show up at very early hours in the morning to obtain a number, which it's not an efficient use of time. I experienced that attempting to renew my Guyanese passport at the passport office in Georgetown, where I visited twice and was turned away because there was limited capacity and services were being offered in a shorter period of time frame. As it relates to COVID-19, I was extremely confused by that structure, because COVID-19 is not a time scale issue. COVID-19 is a spatial issue where you should be expanding the amount of hours where you service the public so that you don't have an amount of people congested in an area for a shorter period of time. So I was not pleased with that structure. And so for Mr. Prasad, Ms. Rasool, and other leadership on the call, I hope that you can convey that to the other relevant contacts in terms of their structure for supporting the Guyanese public, but also someone such as myself who specifically traveled to Guyana to investigate investment opportunities. I am hoping that a lot of these processes, such as one-stop windows, having maps available on websites so that you don't necessarily have to have a representative speak on behalf of you. You can access this information, make planning decisions based on that. I'm hoping these plans can be accelerated. But once again, wanted for that event at the Arthur Chung Convention Center, wanted to extend kudos for that, but looking to gain some clarification, because for Region 4, I was told that there were no commercial lands. So again, kudos, and hoping to receive some clarification to my question.
Good evening. That's not entirely correct that there are no lands available in Region 4. There are lands available as we create new housing schemes. We create new areas to commercial and industrial lands, and we do that going forward. Come next Friday, the 15th, we'll be giving out house lots in the Great and Little Diamond area, and they're acres put aside for commercial and industrial activity. But I want to mention something importantly. Unlike lands and survey, our cost is very, I don't want to say very high, but we do cross subsidization in that for house lots, the prices are very low. So we make that up on the commercial and industrial side. Unlike lands and survey too, however, when you get a commercial or industrial lot from, you get it with all the attendant infrastructure, lights, water, roads, etc. So I just want to put that out there to you. So when you come and you make your application, please bear in mind that the costs will be much more than what you would get at lands and survey.
And Madam Rasool, if I can jump in here, just to share a little bit of my experience with the presenter. Now, there was a time at Lands and Surveys when we had encouraged persons, third party, entering into contracts with persons in respect of land. but it is not a wise thing to do because land on paper, although the idea sounds attractive and it like expedite processing, land on paper is not land in 3D, right? So it's a very, very different thing. So land on paper always looks good, but in our experience, when we had a process that allowed that situation to obtain, a lot of the investors, after spending huge sums of money in acquiring these lands, when they actually come on ground and have a look at it, it cannot suffice for the project that they intend to do. And one of the most important principles in even entering in that contract for land for rental for any purpose is inspection, right? You need to actually see the real estate, the property that you're going to be investing in before you enter into that contract or that agreement. So although the digital maps and so on is nice to express an interest, it is not a wise thing to actually expend huge sums of money without personally visiting these lands as an investor and ensuring that the land that you're investing in is appropriate. So we had to, at one point in our procedure, change and make it mandatory that an inspection by a properly authorized person be executed before we proceed with these applications. So even when we reach the position where we are available to share the information online, I don't foresee our procedure changing to allow persons to invest huge sums of money in acquiring land without actually doing a site visit, either by themselves or somebody legally authorized to do so on their behalf.
If I can quickly add, Mr. Hudson, completely agree with you just mentioned there. I think that initial information that was very helpful in conducting feasibility assessments for various business cases. And so that is really what I was getting at in my question of kind of availability of these materials digitally.
Okay. We have 2 more questions. If there are any more questions, please indicate so now. Either drop your question in the chat or raise your hand. So the first of the last 2, what documents are needed for a Guyanese-born person but citizen of the US to participate in obtaining any land?
Well, good evening. What is important for any applicant residing overseas is that that person must be able to, first of all, apply. And in the case of the Remigrant program, we need to see the birth certificate to confirm that the person was, of course, born in Guyana. And in terms of a commercial industrial application, all as we would have presented, as it would have been presented in the presentation earlier, is for that person to submit that request, stating that they are interested in obtaining a commercial or industrial plot from us, along with the supporting documentation like the incorporation documents and the business proposal and so forth. So that's basically it. But for residential purposes, we would want to know that the person is indeed born in Guyana.
Okay, the next question, can drones be used to share info on lands?
Well, I would say currently we make use of drone, but to gather information for our use in terms of our inventory, our occupancy, even when we are assessing an application for development, like a private land through the planning permission process. because we were wanting the details of what is happening around. So we use that. But in terms of just an individual requesting like what is happening there, again, I will go like what Mr. Hudson alluding to. It is better, we can start, the discussion process where it is located and so, but it's better for you to be here in order to, when you want to execute that, with that process or finalize with that process.
Thank you. I see Mr. Joseph Roach has raised his hand.
Thank you. I've been participating since May when it first started out. First of all, I'm one of those who give you guys a lot of kudos, considering all the people from across the world seeking information. Quick reference, and this is for land survey. You should, or a possibility of using Google Earth, and not particularly to be perfect, but at least you could map it out in a way to give possible developers at least something to look at and stuff like that, where they will still have to correct some more information. But on top of that, one of the things that I wanted to say is that all the information that from all these different meetings that we've had or conferences and stuff like that, would it be possible either to, and I think you guys are already working on it, if I'm not mistaken, is either putting it on a website or put it in the booklet form, because all the stuff that I just heard about land survey is stuff that I've been looking for, but it's been difficult to get, even when I was in Guyana. And one of the things is trying to get to some of these offices, and I understand the restrictions. And then also, housing. I think we all know trying to get to housing is difficult because of the volume of people. So it's not the people who work there, but it's the volume of work. Trying to access and give information to everybody who's trying to get information. So one of my suggestions to you guys is to either set up some kind of website, some kind of booklets, because everything that you have said is very informational. And I think that for any kind of developer, even people who are in Guyana, it's more clear, it's more understanding. This should be something that is posted up in written form and as these podcasts, and just be running. And then a suggestion for anybody trying to get a passport. I actually tried to do the get in the line, and I'm not a big get in the line person since serving in the military stuff. All they have is lines. I ended up going through the embassy by mailing my stuff, and within it was about 3.5 months, and I was able to get everything back appropriate and stuff like that. So there's all those different avenues and stuff like that. So you put together stuff, you mail it out, they'll call you and tell you if there's some kind of issue. If not, you get your little packet back and stuff like that. But just some basics, guidance and suggestions. But once again, you guys are doing an outstanding job. I must give you kudos, like the gentleman said, keep up the good work and stuff like that. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. If Mr. Rollins is available, we'll take his question. If not, we'll go to Mr. Amar Ram.
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. I'd just like to add some comments. I was on an exploratory trip to Guyana in mid-August. I led a Canadian delegation who have interest in not-for-profit to work with youths in disadvantaged communities. And it would be an understatement when I say the various officials we met with provided information with clarity. Because of that, now we are moving forward with our mission to Guyana. Some comments on this webinar. I think the presentation answered many of the questions I had coming into this event. Both of you did a great job at anticipating our many questions when you have prepared your material. So this is an excellent next step. And I just want to also go back to CH&PA. I came back and on August the 18th, I submitted an application for a house lot in the remigration scheme. And about 2 weeks later, I received an acknowledgement email along with an appointment to set up an interview. September 21st, I had that interview. September 28th, it was successfully completed. All of that to say, I have so much confidence in your processes and your presentation and the vision you have and your roadmap. So excellent job. Keep it up. I can speak for myself and I can say I can testify to where you're going, and it is hitting the right marks. Of course, it takes some preparation on my side, some proposal. So if I provide information to you with clarity, I can see, I'll get results. So my encouragement to myself is when I have to engage you again for property or for whatever else, I must have the information which I'm seeing that you're asking for here. So job well done. And I can't wait for tomorrow's presentation. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. We'll take a question now from Sharifa Carmichael. My apologies. Please go ahead.
Not a problem. Hi, good evening. Sorry. I had two questions. One is the housing schemes that are being put forth, are they having responsible energy mandated into their constructions as part of the planning in terms of solar and wind, any kind of systems that'll make it easier for the areas so that they can self-sustain without needing to pull on a big supply that's farther away? And number two, should I ask them both consecutively or wait for an answer? And then the second question is, will this session, as well as all of the information required for any of the processes spoken about, be available offline after this session? Thank you. And if so,
I'll just quickly say that all of the information, everything will be sent out to our mailing list. If you aren't sure that you're on our mailing list, which means you would not have been bombarded by us in the last couple of days, please go ahead and just drop your email in the chat box and we'll be sure to make sure that you get the information. But for your first question, go ahead.
Good evening again. For the current schemes being established, no, we don't have that plan. However, for the new city that we're planning on the highway, we intend that to be a smart city, and we'll use that as the example going forward. So when we do that city, we will use that to guide us in future developments.
can I just also, if it hasn't been considered, to also work in self-sustaining farms inside of each of those areas throughout Guyana as you're going and planning these things, so that people aren't trucking in food from all over the place. And so it's a really sustainable community within a certain radius. And that's how I see it lacking here in North America. And if Guyana is in the process of starting it, it would be awesome for us to template it from a perspective where all of those things are taken into consideration, and using the best practices and benchmarks from around the world and putting that into place in Guyana, and having that so that we actually represent a place people can come and see everything on the, you know, the cutting edge of, because we're at a time where we can actually set that standard going forward.
We're glad to say that we have been doing that, especially in the schemes developing regions 2, 3, 5, and 6.
Yes, and in addition to that, as mentioned by our CEO there, as we look at those long-term plans that Ms. Short would have spoken about in terms of Wales And even in New City, we are looking to include areas for agricultural activity, and we're looking at smart agriculture, right? That would not really require that vast amount of land to develop, but we are looking at exploring that as well and including that in these new areas. So hydroponics and those type of things, that is actually being considered as we look at those long-range plans for Wales and for the new city, Silica City. So thank you. That suggestion is actually noted and is actually being implemented as we develop those areas.
Awesome. Awesome. Kudos to everybody then.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll take one more from Shanta Prasad, and then we'll close it out there. Okay. Is information readily available to investors as to areas where the government has planned some infrastructure project in the future in areas that are available to investors?
Yeah. I'm not sure about this one, but I think if there's a session with the Ministry of Public Works, they may be able to really give some details on planned infrastructural projects. We can only speak on behalf of what we're doing at the Central Authority and how infrastructure will help to support land use that we develop. But we would not be able to really say at this stage.
If I may just intercede, if I may just say something quickly. Yes, you're right. We do have a webinar coming up with several of the ministries in particular. And so Public Works, the Ministry of Public Works is one of those agencies, and definitely the issue of infrastructural development will get featured prominently. So a question like this will be posted to relevant officials from that ministry.
Okay. I'll just try one more time. Mr. Bernard Rollins, if you are available, please go ahead and ask your question. If not, we will be sending out a very comprehensive email tomorrow. We'd like to include the presentations made from both Lands and Surveys and Central Housing and Planning, along with the contact information for persons at those entities. So we can share that with the diaspora so that they can have direct contact with your cells, just to make sure that they're getting the relevant and necessary information. I'd like to now turn to Ms. Rosalinda Rasul for the closing. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Keisha, for an excellent job. And let me thank everybody from the diaspora for being here. Your presence means a lot, and we want to let you know that this is exactly what we intended, to engage the various stakeholders in Guyana and the diaspora so they can be greater communication, greater dialogue, and that will be very useful for national development. I want to thank the officials from Central Housing and Planning Authority, as well as the Guyana Lands and Survey Commission, for a job most excellently done. We're very delighted with your presentations, and we thank you for your support. We want to assure both agencies that we're here to give you as many support as possible in your endeavor. The diaspora is an amazing community of people whose interests are genuinely here for Guyana, and they want to see Guyana develop. And so your agencies are very crucial to their goals and objectives. And I know that with that continued dialogue, we're going to see a lot of improvement and a lot of systems being altered. I want to thank you so much again for the job excellent. I learned a lot myself this evening, and I'm very excited about, particularly with the single window project, as was so amazingly described here and what it endeavors to do. And when I listen to what you plan to do with that, such as look at your legislation, we know that this is a project that is well thoroughly thought out with investors in mind. So I'm very grateful about that. And so thank you to the agencies and to the members of the diaspora. Thank you for your presence and your questions. You can be sure that we are listening and we're following up on your feedback and your questions, and we're trying to engage as many institutions as we can so that collectively we can work to make Guyana a better place. Please continue to join us tomorrow and the rest of the evenings. We have more agencies lined up for you, and you'll be sure to get many more answers to your questions and to any burning issue you would have had over many years, I should say. All right. And we look forward to engaging you continuously. And thank you so much for being here. Please continue to share our invites so as many people as possible, because we want the word to get out there for those who have been asking for information, and we're finally presenting it to them. So thank you to everybody, and the Central Housing and Planning and Land and Survey and all the members of the diaspora.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Night.
So later, got me out on road.
Excellent presentation.